The Academy of Esports podcast is brought to you by LeagueSpot. LeagueSpot, your brand, your league, your way. Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. Welcome to year 6 of the Academy of Esports. April 2018 is when I launched the Academy of Esports podcast to look at the intersection between esports and education. And I am excited to continue that work moving forward. And to do that, to launch that, I am bringing forth Amir Satvat. He is an absolute legend, and I think by the time you are done watching this episode or listening to this episode, you will also be able to not stop smiling. We actually had to divide this into a 2-part episode because there was so much amazing content. In fact, in part 2, I'm going to give you a little hint. We're bringing forth an opera singer to discuss esports and education. It truly is an amazing episode. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with this absolute legend, Amir Satvat. Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I am your host, James O'Hagan, and I am so happy to have the opportunity to bring in Amir. He is my friend. He is a LinkedIn superhero. He is the producer of the Amir Satvat Video Game Awards, which if you did not get the chance to watch that, shame on you. Go back in YouTube and find that. Amir operates one of the largest video game LinkedIn communities with nearly, I can't believe this, 32,000 followers, more than half of whom work in the games industry. Amir has played over 2,200 titles in their life, and their favorite video game series include Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Monkey Island, which I see in the background there, and The Witcher. The first game they ever played was Asteroids on the Atari 2600. But professionally, Amir is the global head of startup operations at Amazon Web Services. Prior to this, they served as principal publishing producer, and prior to that, both business development and strategy lead at Amazon Games. And prior to this, they served as the COO for AWS Inside Sales and Demand Generation Business. And before this, there's so much. Before this, they spent over a decade in the tech and healthcare sectors in a variety of roles across strategy, operations, and business development. Amir earned their MBA and master's in engineering from the University of Penn and his MPA in public policy from NYU. Amir, thank you for being a guest today on the Academy of Esports podcast.
Thank you, James. And thank you for that mouthful. But, going forward, I think we're going to have a lot of fun talking about a lot of subjects that I know we both share in common. And I really appreciate both your and Fiona's just endless support of me. You've been there with me since the beginning. You're a really special person. And I want you to know, in addition to this podcast, I really appreciate everything you do as a gamer, as an educator, and as someone who really cares about kids and their development. I really value you as a person.
Well, thank you so much for those kind words. I cannot say enough in that introduction, though. If you have not yet seen the game awards that Amir put together, you must seek that out. You must watch it. It is something that I remember watching that and sitting there, and just the feelings of joy and happiness I had not felt, honestly, since the start of the pandemic. That was like, it was like the first time, even though I was in my kitchen, I remember where I was sitting at my kitchen, eating my dinner and just enjoying watching this and having a nice meal. I felt like I was having dinner with a friend who was telling me this amazing story. And it was, again, like the pandemic lifted. And after that, the pandemic ended for me. I felt like I could go back into society, that everything was going to be okay. So again, I thank you for that. Now, with that amazing introduction that we both did for each other, and I appreciate your words too, my friend, I have a question for you, and it's a bit of an icebreaker. And so you didn't get this question ahead of time. Normally, I used to give my guests these questions, but we're kind of changing up the questions here a little bit. So here it is for you. A door opens. A fog machine fills the archway with mist. The crowd holds its breath as your shadow appears in the distance, striding towards your grand entrance. What song is the DJ playing?
So, I feel like the music would play, gosh. I think that the DJ would play. So I could have gone classical, but I'm going to go in the other direction. So I'm a child of the 80s, and my partner Jess constantly teases me about this because, I was born in 82. So it's not like I was in high school in the 80s, but I like to always tell her that's the decade that I like really remember because you still remember things. I was 7 or 8. So I have to pick probably something by, I would say, Hungry Like a Wolf. I have to pick like a classic 80s song. I was going to say either Duran Duran or Tears for Fears, right?
All right, so you went with a Duran Duran classic, which also, by the way, for those of you, I was born in 75, so I remember a little more of the 80s. And I got to say, in 1989, I was in high school for my freshman year. But it's not just a great song, but the video. The video it's Duran Duran on a yacht out in the ocean. And was that Rio? No, that was Rio. Yeah. I'm gonna get pummeled.
No, but that video is really great too. I mean, the music videos were so great. I miss all of those, like Aha and like all those. And there's still music videos, but it was a different thing. It's like when you make the joke with people that I was around since the Yellow Pages. I was around since MTV actually showed music videos, and that was like 90% of the programming. There was it's like before they had, what was that silly show they had? They had like the show where people like had a remote control or something before.
Called Remote Control.
Rules. Was it Remote Control? Was that literally what it's called? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It was Colin
Quinn?
Colin Quinn.
Yeah, that was starting his career. Yeah.
And I think DeWeasel Zappa was one of the hosts of that show. I seem to remember DeWeasel Zappa might have had a role in that. Son of Frank Zappa, for those of you who don't know. And if you don't know who Frank Zappa is, go look him up. If you would like, if you like They Might Be Giants, you will love Frank Zappa.
Frank Zappa's pretty great. Yeah.
Now, before we get too much into something else, I want to also give, again, kudos to your work with the Job Seekers Workbook, because I know that you've done a couple of things to help bring the gaming community together. The Job Seekers Workbook, over 901 registered jobs. This workbook, this spreadsheet, that, a lot of people just go like, oh, spreadsheets, blah. Viewed 500,000 times, over 500,000 times since March 1st. That is 6-7 weeks from where we are recording today. Free membership from a network of 230 plus people that LinkedIn has built. And free 30-minute conversations, which I have given to some people. I've put myself on that mentorship network, and it is a reach out anytime database. Please share a little bit of advice. I mean, what was the impetus? What brought you to want to say, you know what, we need to bring the community together in this way?
Yeah, James, it's something I'm passionate about, and I appreciate how much you've supported all those initiatives, and to anyone out there listening who supported them, which are many, many people. I think that people have these inflection points of what happens in their careers. I remember very briefly, but for 2-3 years at the beginning of my career, I started in investment banking. And I remember in certain investment banking corporations, whatever, your line of work too, people have moments in their careers that are kind of gritty, and you're a junior person, people give you hell, they ask you to do all kinds of things. And I feel like people react to these types of moments in their careers in different ways. Some people are like, oh, I can't wait until I break through so I can give other people hell the same way I had to go through hell, because that's part of the journey. But some people are like, you know what? I can't wait to break through so nobody else ever has to go through what I did, because that sucked. And where I'm going with this is, as you know, I didn't break through myself professionally in the games industry until I was 37. Mostly a lot of it because for personal reasons, I didn't want to move to the West Coast where most of the jobs were. But another big part of it is I just didn't know how to do it. It's really a vocational job. I always kind of use that term with people. It's a work of love. So many people want to work in this space. And I think a lot of people have passion for these types of games things, but unless they match up against something that's a pretty obvious career fit, like art or programming, and even in those cases, they just don't know what to do. They don't know who to talk to. Maybe nobody in their career has never worked in the field. They don't have resources. The resources that are available are oftentimes paid or gated. It oftentimes feels like it's a kind of old chummy network of people who know each other. And I was like, you know what? I want to break that perception apart in two ways. One is that I want anyone who wants the help to have it. But I also knew, because of all the people I had even met before the community started getting bigger, that most of the people in the games industry, the vast, vast, vast majority, are in fact, in my experience, really caring, really supportive people who themselves also want to help those people, but they don't know what to do either. And so I was like, if I just stand in the middle, I don't actually have to do anything that's rocket science. A lot of these things are just matching exercises, they're data aggregation exercises, but doing that in a disciplined and organized way brings a lot of people together. And I'm very pleased that people have responded to that.
Well, I think you and I have both found our way to our spot, our place in the games industry, not again as in non-traditional ways. I was a teacher for over 20 years. But games and play were the core of my business, that I was trying to not just educate children, but to try to get them into where they would want to be for the rest of their lives, helping them find their passion. And play is one of those core things that I think we discount too much as we get older. And that's, again, I think what you're kind of alluding to, and what I'm hearing a little bit, is that the skills you develop, a lot of them can transfer or be built through the play that you do. Would you say that's a fair statement?
I of course would, James. And I think that, what's so valuable about what you did, and it brings up another point I want to raise, is that I think a lot of this is just normalizing games. Like, this is going to change over time organically, right? But as you and I know, when we grew up, there really weren't games. So there weren't many games, right? The first major consoles, there were I should say they weren't video games. Good correction. But there was like the Magnavox Odyssey in the late 70s, the mainstream consoles and arcades that people know didn't really blossom until, again, the late 70s, early 80s. And so a lot of people in organizations, parents, grandparents that you and I are around all the time, it's not anything malicious, but it's like they may not have grown up playing this or understanding it. Is all the silly things you and I have heard, oh, it like rots your brain, oh, it's like a waste of time. And so like what I'm trying to say is, I think that it's so important to do that early in schools, so it's normalized that has a place in a way that has build skills and relationships and all kinds of positive attributes in kids. But also in my community, what we try to build together within that community, besides any of the activities or the content or anything like that, the kind of overarching cloud, beautiful cloud above all of it is, it's okay and normal and great to be a nerd. It's okay and great and normal to love games. You're not weird. You're not wasting your time. You're not alone. You're not in like a box. And it's like, I never do anything that doesn't have a reason. And people often be like, hey, Amir, why'd you post this? Why'd you post that? And I'm always like, I give a reason. But then the second reason for everything is every single letter I type is to let people to know that this is a valid special interest that they should celebrate and feel celebrated for.
That is such a great point to have, especially because when you think of the demographics of gamers, let's just, again, board games, video games, more likely than not, you are going to find somebody who also likes to play, who likes games. They may not openly feel like they could admit it, as you alluded to. I remember I heard a conversation with Arabian Prince, who's a rapper for NWA, say that he was a huge gamer growing up, but he could never talk about it because it was not seen as gangster, or it was not accepted in his community. But that didn't stop him from gaming. Even today, I had a conversation with a gentleman who is a hockey player in Sweden, or was a hockey player in Sweden. And yes, they love their hockey, but when they were on the road, they were playing Counter-Strike. In fact, he said the coaches would come back and see them on the bus, and thought they were talking about hockey strategy and drawing out hockey strategy. No, they were drawing out Counter-Strike source maps about how they were going to play those games later. And here's the other thing, through all this, through this play and things that you've talked about and shared with us in your LinkedIn conversations and the things that you post, advice you often give job seekers: knowing career skills are highly transferable across industries. I built a baseline of abilities I could eventually use in video games. Those are your words. I mean, that is the advice. When I have kids who ask me, how do I get into the game industry? I'm just going to tell them this from now on. And I'm going to say, you need to, first of all, create a LinkedIn account. Second, you need to follow Amir. And then third, you need to, again, build a baseline of abilities that can eventually use in video games.
That's completely right. And you've done your homework. It makes me smile hearing those words. I feel like oftentimes you do need to repeat things over and over again because they're truisms that you really believe in and you can't emphasize them enough. I think the one that you just said, James, about just keeping your eye on the target and building skills is a critical one. I think the second one that I often tell people, that I know you've heard me say many times on LinkedIn, is this idea of lateraling. People get themselves so bound up in the fact that, like if I don't directly apply to Blizzard and get a job there, like it's a total fail. And I'm like, no, do what I did. Go to Amazon, get another job. And you may in fact find, which I think is largely true, you can be a program manager in like Division A that works on like Alexa or works on like Whole Foods. And then you can find yourself being a program manager in the games org. Like, I think there's a high amount of overlap in a lot of these functions. And I think a lot of times people don't want to admit that because, again, they want to have this perception that there's like a little bit of an incumbency advantage and they don't want to believe that those skills are transferable. I've always said very openly that I think the industry can be more open-minded about giving people that chance to make their skills transferable. But I think objectively, those skills are transferable. And I think it just takes managers and groups that are willing to give people the shot.
Well, and people love stories. People love play, but also a lot of these games also tell a story. They're a common mythology. I can say to my children, Pac-Man, Mario Brothers, Zelda, Link, they're going to know in their mind immediately what those create pictures in their mind of what they are. They are our modern mythology. They don't just entertain us. They're powerful ways of transmitting some emotions and information between us and the audience. Science has even shown that these things can change our brain behavior. So what is the one main story you would love to see us all telling the world about games? And what chapter, if any, is the industry missing at the moment?
I think the main story that we need to tell people about games is a little bit of what you just said. I think it's that you need to think bigger about what a game is. A game is a piece of media that tells a story. And I think that what we're seeing right now is take The Last of Us, take The Witcher, take Super Mario. And you see that now increasingly, take Cuphead. People are taking these games and they're putting them in TV shows and they're putting them in movies. And that same person who's the enthusiast of it in one medium is in another. And what I always keep saying to people is like, you love this show, right? Well, a game is just an interactive story. Now, I'm biased, of course. That's why I believe it's the richest one, because it's not just a story in a form of media, but it's one that you can actively interact with in every moment, which is what I think makes it particularly rich. But I think framing it in that way and thinking of it as stories and media and characters and an interactive cartoon or art, right? What Gabe Newell famously said about Super Mario 64, that, it convinced him that it was art, and that for Miyamoto, it was his dream of a livable, playable cartoon. So I think that's a piece of it. To answer your second question about what chapter are we missing, I think what we're missing is that breadth of what games are is much broader than people think. Like, you were kind of going in this direction, I think, earlier, James, with, how many people play games but don't think of themselves as gamers. And it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in an event with like older relatives or older friends, and you're sitting there and like, I'm talking to someone about like Hades. And then like the older relative next to me is playing like Candy Crush, or even removed from that, they're playing like a game that probably no one's heard of, that's like a word game or like a picture object game on like their phone. I know because I've asked. If you ask those people, like, are you a gamer or do you play video games? They're like, oh no, I'm just doing this like puzzle on my phone. But those are gamers. You know, people who do that are gamers. So it's like, I feel like we need to be more open-minded about what games are, and we need to be more open-minded about what games encompass. And if we do that, we'll realize that everybody's a gamer, whether they realize it or not.
Did you hear the story recently, just a slide aside, of the mother who has been playing Candy Crush for quite a while, and she didn't realize that she entered a $250,000 tournament unknowingly? She has never spent $1 on any boosts or anything. She watches all the advertisements, and her son is looking at like, what is she doing? And realizes she's ranked #1 in the USA in this $250,000 official Candy Crush tournament. She had no idea that she had even entered it, and that she was doing quite so well. And again, she has not paid for one power up, not one. And she watches all the advertisements. It's amazing.
That's so funny. I had not heard of that, but you know what's so funny about that, James? This is like the point to me, which is, and I know you and I have talked quite a bit about esports, which, I imagine we might talk a little bit later, but it's like people look at esports and like competitive games and people who play, and they look at it as this kind of like foreign thing. And what I always keep saying to everyone, again, per the demographics, is a lot of this stuff is just going to change. Like, when I'm 70 years old, I can assure you, as long as I don't have like debilitating arthritis, I'm going to be playing video games a lot every single day and like enjoying it. And it's like, I've even seen, I think I posted on this, that there was this amazing esports league that they had basically for seniors, and these are starting to crop up. And so that mom who was entered in that, which is like such a cute and fun story, who knows if that person hadn't been young again today, they wouldn't have been like a serious player of something else. Or like, who knows, they would have become like a Valorant player, but they just never had the exposure because it didn't exist.
Well, and again, I think that chapter 2, maybe not a full chapter on it, but maybe we can attend to it, or add on to it. I'll just say that, is that it's not just that the definition of a gamer isn't as broad, but I think the social acceptance, you alluded to earlier, you said something about a child being told a waste of time, and that their game or the thing that they are doing is a waste of time. And I've talked about this many times to people. Imagine being told by somebody that you care about, somebody that you love, a parent, a grandparent, whomever, that what you are doing, the thing that you love to do, is consider a waste of time. That's hurtful, whether it's comic books or, because, it's funny. The first year I was teaching, I was amazed at the librarian, who was this wonderful woman named Linda Berry. She was a 30-year plus librarian in the school that I worked at. She was so kind and caring, and she had this amazing collection of graphic novels and comics. And here's me, fresh out of Purdue University, first year teacher, and I kind of go in and I go, why do you have all these comics and graphic novels here in the library? And she said, oh, it's reading. And I said, yeah, but these are graphic novels and comics, and not putting together. She looks at me and she sits me down and she says, look, Jim, this is not about getting kids to read specific books. This is to get kids loving to read at this level. And it is, she said, reading a comic is non-linear. So for many of our kids, non-linear reading is how they are going to learn to read. Their brains are not always going to go in straight lines. They are going to go here and here and here and here and here. And guess what? The fact that they can put together a story and follow it based off of the pictures, the context clues within that, and that it is a non-linear way. She says that's like trying to play a musical instrument. I mean, if we think about it, a musical instrument is a 3-dimensional object, and you are taking a 3-dimensional object and manipulating it in a way so that you can process a 2-dimensional piece of music in your brain and operate those two things at the same time. That the games, I think the importance of games is the chapter also, I think, that we are missing in some ways.
Yeah, no, it's really true. I mean, I think that when you think about games and you slice the kind of comments that people make about them, it's like a little bit in two halves. Like part of it is, are games recreation, right? I'm not going to pretend that every game you play in every moment, like, for all the things that they do, it improves imagination, hand-eye coordination, whatever, but it is also recreation. But to your point, so are hundreds of other things. Some people needlepoint. Some people cook. Some people go outside and they like run. All of these things are like great, valid interests. And I would argue that literally outside of like directly studying for like school or like doing your job or maybe some baseline level of exercise each day that like keeps you healthy, anything that you do in your life beyond that amount of time, whatever activity it is, I basically consider them on an equal plane in terms of recreation, yet we all try to ascribe different values on what we think those things are or aren't, in most cases based upon what we valued or what we were told to value when we were kids. And so we're reflecting back what we experienced. I think the second slice of that is the entertainment. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, is that like entertainment value as well? Like she said about the graphic novels. And again, I could make a strong case that if we're now not talking about the recreative part, but we're talking about the nourishing and beneficial part, I could again argue that in many ways, if you want to go down that way, which I don't think matters because people should just be able to think that their interests are valid, I could argue that games are in fact a much more valid interest than others for many reasons, but I just don't think that way. But if people want to go that way, I could argue that with them.
And again, to your point about that, we have, talking about nourishing. I think you said the word nourishing. You said nourishing, right? Yes, you said nourishing. Let's keep saying that word, nourishing. It's not just curiosity that we are nourishing. If everything that you do all day is for somebody else, is for an extrinsic motivation, your mom tells you to do it, teacher tells you to do it, dad tells you to do it, somebody else is telling you to do it, and you never get to do something for yourself. When you finally do get to do that thing for yourself, it is a very liberating feeling. It fires these different parts of your brain that bring pleasure. It fires these parts of your brain that hopefully spark new brain development growth. It is something that the intrinsic motivational value of the things that you love to do is, again, it's the thing that you would do if nobody told you what to do. Like, Amir, I want you to create this 2-hour long video game award show, and I want you to do all the work for it. You might go, James, that's a lot of work. I don't know if I don't care. I want you to do it. No, you did that on your own. Nobody told you that you had to do that. And again, the byproduct, of course, was, I think if you would have been happy if one person watched or if nobody watched, you still enjoy doing it. That's why I do this podcast. Mm-hmm. If nobody watches, if nobody listens, I'm going to still do this because this conversation is just as nourishing for me and my needs as it hope it is for some other people who get to listen to it and choose to listen to it. But you are reaching, if you haven't officially done it yet, you are reaching legendary status, at least in the world of LinkedIn. And it's not that far off if you're not there already, but I'll say that it is. So what do you say what do you say has impact? Okay. Obviously. And a lot of people are impacted by job losses right now and are relying on you as your strength. I mean, you are providing a lot of strength for people. I mean, the industry, especially the games industry right now, is going through a lot of upheaval and change for reasons that some of us can or cannot understand. I mean, even yesterday, Riot, the president of Riot came out and made a very lengthy blog post talking about how they're going to they're all in on esports and they want to make sure that people know that they're not going to abandon it. But people also need validation right now as their emotions are recharging. And I know that some leaders who swear by no templates, basically they sit down once and create a sincere but firm no for a variety of situations so that they're better equipped to hold their boundaries when they need self-care. What's it like for you? You're so generous and giving with your time, but how do you, somebody who you have a lovely family, children, passions that I loved the photo that you posted of you and your wife taking the train into New York City.
Thank you.
For your anniversary, which was just so generously. I shared that with some of my people at my company. It was so beautiful.
Thank you.
But how do you hold a line to keep something for yourself and your family?
Definitely. I mean, I think that, and I'd be curious. I'll ask you back the same thing in a second, James, about all the activities you do, which is, I I try to treat the stuff that I do on LinkedIn like a job, except in one or two very important ways that are distinct. So, in a job, in most jobs, you have a whole bunch of different colleagues you work with on teams. You're accountable for certain things you have to produce and working with other people. You have a regimented schedule, or many people do, how you do work, how you produce things. And again, for most people, not everyone, I can say this is true for me, you have certain boundaries where your workday starts and ends, and then you stop and you try to make sure that you're disciplined about that and you're with your family. That's how I treat the stuff on the channel, with the difference being that I allow it to be a project of one. Many people have offered to help me on all kinds of things on the channel. It's the stuff I do with the job stuff, interning with me, helping to write things. And I've always said no. And there are many reasons for that. But the main reason is what you said, which is I have a very regimented approach to how I do everything, like behind the cameras. I have a schedule of when I update each of the things we do for job stuff. I have a regimented schedule of when I write 70% of the content. And I typically do it on the weekends when I'm not with my family, or in the late evenings when my family's gone to sleep. And so a lot of my work is done with scheduled posts and a highly regimented schedule, and it works because I do it all by myself and I can control everything. Jess is so supportive of it and knows that it means so much to me as an outlet, but especially the part of it that's about helping other people, that she and I think of this almost like as an aspect of community service. And as long as it doesn't interfere with the family, we make it important. I think that one last part of that allows me to maintain the family balance is I've consciously decided, as it got bigger and bigger and there was more and more content, that this is like the one big thing I allow myself time to do outside the family. Like, I feel like I have my family, I have my job. I obviously play a lot of games because I need to in order to do all the reviews and also stay informed. And I do the LinkedIn channel. And as you know, I like play the piano and a few other things. And I go for walks, of course, and stuff like that too. But I mean,
like a Renaissance man.
But the LinkedIn channel is like the one big thing I do in life. And so I hope I'm answering your question to say that for anyone out there who's watching this, like, please don't worry that I'm up until like 2 o'clock every day and everyone's like, oh, Amir, how are you commenting? And like, you never sleep and you do this and that. Like, if I'm up late sometimes, it's because like, I'm kind of a restless person and I don't sleep very much. I haven't since I was a kid, but like, it's much more organized and less of a burden than it might look like because I've developed all kinds of structure and tricks. I don't know how do you balance it, James? Like, how do you feel about the same question?
Well, you are and again, let's pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, you do share so much about you and your life. With me and my life, I am divorced. My children are older. A lot of the work that I do is because I do have the time to be able to devote. My children are not here. Now, when my children are here, I will, and as I'm saying all this, of course, one of my 2 cats is asking for attention, which I do have 2 cats. But, not having my family here, I had to find ways to fill my time. And it was either I could be constructive or destructive. And obviously I chose constructive. I like to make sure that what I'm doing, again, as an educator for so long, it could have been very easy for me to fall into the trap of just being a destructive person in social media spaces. That seemed to be the way to get noticed everywhere. But again, I choose to build up rather than tear down. I do ask, some people may argue that I am destructive, but I like to ask argumentative questions. I like to ask why. It's funny. I had a conversation earlier today with a gentleman from Missouri, and it is the show me state. And I think as part of my upbringing in Kansas City for a number of years, I lived that show me state lifestyle. So that for me has been a conscious choice of being constructive, but also having the boundary. And this was something I also had to learn, and it was not easy to learn, because as educators, we are kind of conditioned to, you have to be on all the time. You have to give everything all the time. Every day you are expected to come in at 100% and leave at 0%. If you haven't, then you haven't done your job. That is a false narrative. That is not the reality of what teaching is. Yes, teaching is a calling, but it is not meant to be your life 24/7. You are allowed to have a life outside. And especially during the pandemic, I think a lot of teachers felt that their barriers were taken down for them because they were expected to, again, be online so much and be responsive to their students. And I think right now why so many of them were exhausted and burning out was because of that feeling that they were not, quote unquote, giving enough for their kids. And I think right now a lot of people in the field of education are just learning now how to build those barriers back up. And for some families and some children, they have to be reconditioned to believe that these barriers are important for their teachers, that their teachers are real people. And again, it's not something that is easy for us all to do. So I appreciate you asking the question back at me. It's very interesting that we have two different perspectives, because again, your family is with you, mine is not, but it does not mean that I love my children. I care for my ex-wife. I want to make sure that she is taken care of and can take care of my children, probably because she is a good mother to them. And it is, I don't want to say easier for me to be generous with my time, but again, I do it because it allows me to be constructive and help, I guess, is what you do as well.
No, I appreciate your openness, James. And one thing I'll add to that is that, you do have to have those boundaries. And I always do for family stuff and for my own personal space and for, again, like I said, work. But with that said, you know what I always think? It's like, you remember in Apollo 13 where they're trying to help them and they're in the capsule. And Gary Sinise is doing, I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Gary Sinise is doing all the tests to see how much power they can use for the LEM. And he's exhausted. And the NASA people come up to him and they're like, well, don't you want a break? You must be exhausted. And he's like, if they don't get a break, I don't either. And so I think about when I'm doing the LinkedIn stuff, and I promise I'm not going to get emotional about it because it's affected a lot of people I know personally. I think about the thousands and tens of thousands of people who've lost their jobs, many of whom are the single income earners in their families. And I think them going to their families, and they have kids too, and saying we don't have income. I don't know what we're going to do. Many of them are depressed. They it's just tearing their lives apart. And if something that I can do and that our community can do in either just keeping their spirits afloat so that they can keep their family spirits afloat, or the ultimate thing of helping them get a job so they can not only keep their spirits afloat, but financially keep their families afloat, I'm not going to do it to a level that's a detriment to my mental or physical health or that of my family's. But beyond that, what else is there that I can do with my time that has value? Right. I can't think of what else I could do that's more important.
And with that, we're going to end this episode here, because in episode 2, or the second half of this conversation, Amir and I get to bring in somebody who I never would have anticipated would ever have been a guest on the Academy of Esports podcast. But we bring in an opera singer. Yes, an opera singer. And I think that it is going to baffle, but also intrigue many of the previous listeners here, just as how do we fit an opera singer into this conversation. But again, as we have always seen with the Academy of Esports podcast, I like to take things in different directions. So this one is a very different direction. So Tune in next week for the follow-up episode or the second half of this conversation with Amir Satvat.
That will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote good physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We can never forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan. That's at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account at TAO Esports. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com. You can also connect through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.